Okay, for the sake of time, I think it's a couple minutes past the hour. I think we can get rolling, and we'll be recording this for people that join in later aren't able to attend, so they can get caught up later. My name is Matt Simmons, President of SimTech Solutions, and I have Anna Rausch, who's also joining us today from Houston, as well as Kevin Charwin-Borawat from SimTech to share both the mobile tech that we have for street outreach, but how it plays a role in helping people address encampments. And Anna's going to share some details about not just the tech, but the process that they've used and are using in Houston to close encampments in a way that's humane and housing focused. So without further ado, let's get rolling. So why are we focusing on encampments? Well, it's basically the same reason we're focusing on people who call their car their home. And you know, it's a growing problem throughout the US, but really they become a default living situation, both cars and tents, for people who live in communities that either do not have sufficient shelter or housing options, or whatever the options are, they're just unappealing. So the reasons can vary, but for those of you that work in this space, you're probably, you know, painfully aware of them. Sometimes the shelters don't allow pets. Sometimes you can't bring your things in with you. And sometimes that's all you have. That means a lot. Right? So whatever those things might be. There's times when going into a shelter, it's going to force you to abandon the partner that lives with you on the streets. And, you know, oftentimes those people, those supports, whether it be your pet, your partner, as well as all your things, it's just not a viable option. So, you know, it puts people in a tough spot. So just having shelter beds may not be enough, especially when those shelter beds come with a lot of restrictions. And then beyond that, we also have some new guidance coming down from the Center for Disease Control that's being lifted as far as, the protections that were put in place to allow for sheltering in place, and saying we're not going to touch those camps because it's safer to bring services to those people where they are. That allowed protection for some of those camps and people to stay where they are. But now that those are getting eased back, you're going to see more sweeps. So Caltrans, as an example, that's you know, the transportation authority here in California, all of a sudden is now easing up on those restrictions and saying, you know what we used to say is leave them be. Now you can go in and do more sweeps. So what we're trying to do is encourage the interpretation of the word resolution to be more in line with what Houston's doing, and have a housing focus and be humane in the approach, versus what some communities we're seeing are doing, which is coming in with the garbage trucks and bulldozers and handcuffs, and you know, and citations too. Sometimes it's not always arresting people, but if you hand someone a $500 citation that's already living on the streets, it's, you know, it's a downward spiral already. So it's just making the situation worse. It's not a solution. And that's an excerpt from the Caltrans guidance saying that moderate and lower priority encampments can now be swept. Really, this is just an image here from LA. I was there on Friday. I took this shot while I was at a stoplight. And for those of you that aren't in California, you know, I grew up in upstate New York and then went to Boston area. We don't see this type of more in-your-face encampments on the streets and the sidewalks and right on the sides to the same level. This is like, you know, right at a major intersection, and it's everywhere. You know, and this is obviously a structure that took a while to build. So, you know, there's a lot going into it. But just to give you an idea, you know, now we've got neighborhoods, you know, associations saying we need to enclose, close these. And there's certain reasons sometimes it's for that. But what are the alternatives? So we need to try to think about creative alternatives and strategies to find people another better, hopefully better place to live. And then we have some legalese that's happening. You know, the Martin versus City of Boise case, really that, you know, to me was exciting because it basically said you can't be arresting people for just having their basic human needs being met. You know, people need a place to sleep, they need a place to go to the bathroom, they need a place to eat. And so in this case, it was focused on sleeping. But the way that the legalese is structured, you can still enforce in making camping illegal if you have an alternative. So, you know, that alternative is some of the gray area that some cities are using to still allow for, you know, arresting people that are sleeping. And then beyond that, you know, this is an example of now that with citations, it's really tying up the court systems and police officers, you know, who ideally will be working on you know, more high risk situations, because there's a burden of proof and evidence that needs to go along with it. So now you've got your police officers who are writing the citations, and then it's not just that one action, it's the follow-on actions and having to support these cases over time on that side of it. And then the other side of it is you're criminalizing someone for basically, you know, doing something that everyone does, which in this case is sleeping. So another reason for the focus. And there's also a unique opportunity here in California because it is the #1 issue. You know, you know, I don't think there's much disputing on that here in California. They did just pass a pretty significant bill you know, towards homelessness, refunding appropriation, and within that is an encampment resolution program. And really, what, you know, again, what we're trying to do is make sure the definition of resolution is really more in line to what we see as being a best practice. And so that's why we invited Anna and her colleagues from the Houston Coalition for the Homeless to share what they're doing. A little bit of, you know, some pretext to the conversation. The line in red is the unsheltered population in California. This is from the point in time trend analysis dashboards that are made publicly available. We're using the HUD data sets that HUD publishes, albeit slowly. And for the communities we work with, just to throw it out there, if you're on the phone or during the call, you can update this information with your results from your 2021 results for those of you who did do the count, so you can have fresh trend lines and not have to wait for the HUD results. But with California, we have a gap. So 40 of the 44 COCs decided not to do the pit count last January, citing the pandemic as the reason why. And so we now have the question mark of where that trend is going. Now, I think if you can look at the past as a predictor of the future, you know, we have a rising trend line ever since 2014 all the way through 2020, and you have additional socioeconomic disparities. You know, there's that, and you have a pandemic, and you have an eviction moratorium now being lifted. So where is that number going to go? You know, it's a pretty safe bet that it's going to go in the wrong direction, unfortunately, unless there's something. You know, I think it's like every action, you know, needs an equal, you know, basically an opposite reaction in order to counter it. So otherwise, it's going to, you know, it's the whole physics principle. Like an object in motion tends to stay in motion. So we need to be able to counteract this current motion or this trend upwards with something. So there's that. And you know, to look at the stats in another way, so you see that the shelter beds, and then here you've got the shelter beds, and you have the total homeless in those beds, emergency shelters. What you have is 113,000 out of 149 people on the individual side are unsheltered. So you've got 76% of your population of the entire state is actually living on the streets. And what you also have is 3.9 people per bed that's available. So there's a pretty significant gap here that needs to be filled. So if you look at that, it's a pretty sizable gap. And roughly half of the beds that are available in California are focused on families. So there's less options for the individual population. Now, looking at the similar data chart. Again, these are all available. We'll put them in the dashboard. You can pick any COC and do peer-to-peer benchmarking and see where things are going. But looking at Houston, what we have is half the population is unsheltered, so it's not as stark. And as far as bed availability, we have 1.78 beds. There are homeless people for every shelter bed, so it's not the 3.9 that we see in California. And it's still similar with about roughly half and half of beds attributed, kind of allocated for families versus for individuals. And the good news here, if you look at the trend line for Houston, it's actually, what we saw before with California of a rising trend line for the unsheltered population since 2014. We're seeing the opposite. So something's happening in Houston that's different. And so, there's a lot of nuances to it, but there's some good practices happening in Houston. I know that. So, and then on the unsheltered side, overall, what this is called a tree map, and the larger the square, the larger the population. Now we have this clustered by state, and obviously, the state of California is pretty sizable, so that can constitute a fair amount of the prevalence rates here. But Texas is also really sizable. So, you've got, Texas is the #2 state overall as far as the unsheltered population. LA in its own right has more than the next 2 states combined on the unsheltered side. So, it may even also be the top 3. I have to run those numbers. But yeah, so it's a fair amount. I believe it's 40% in the last AHAR of the unsheltered population was from California. So, and then just a teaser on that, we're talking about when we talk with HUD and we think about our analysis as a community, we have these system performance measures and these regional reports, that they're great for what they do accomplish, but it's also important to recognize the gap of what they don't accomplish. And really that is, for me, one of the big takeaways is they're ignoring the unsheltered population. The system performance measures really is only one of them that looks at unsheltered, and that's SPM7. And this is Houston's system performance measure. This is from the dashboards too, which are also available. So if you want a visual rendering of your system performance results, just like Stella is for the LSA, but you don't have to log in. Those are available, and they'll be dropped in the chat. And then so the system performance measures and the LSA largely ignore outreach. And there's data quality issues that you can look at for that. It's probably an underlying circumstance, but that's part of what we're trying to address with the use of mobile tech. And just a teaser, we're going to be going through the functionality within the Show the Way app of what it does, at a high level overview, just to get you an idea of what we're talking about after Anna jumps on and shares what's happening in her community. This is a high level overview of the encampment features within Show the Way. Now, there's other features beyond that with case management, ticketing system, but again, things others will share, a request for assistance ticketing system, not the citation one. But just a high level of what functionality is available to produce those by name lists of the population that's in each encampment. So with that said, I am going to pass the reins over to Anna. And Anna, I can drive if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, that's great. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. It's something that is definitely a hot topic in Houston, and we are really appreciative of our partnership with Syntec that started back with Hurricane Harvey. In fact, some of the strategies that we use in our encampment response for landlord engagement in particular came out of that Housing for Harvey work. So the article that you see here in front of you was something that was written when we really didn't know what we were doing. We were starting out. We just kind of played it by ear. We were trial and error at that point, but we're starting to get to the point where we're putting our work to paper and really tracking everything that we're doing, and definitely the technology for the pit, and of course the Show the Way through Syntec has helped a lot. Really at this point, our encampment response has several components, 4 major components. The first one is the intensive outreach and engagement that we use. It's housing focused case management, and the case managers and outreach go out and really connect with residents and encampments with services to ensure that every encampment resident has a permanent housing strategy, because it's really something we believe in strongly. Our point in time count is about 1,500 unsheltered at this time. It's not a lot, but Houston is very sprawled. We have about 3,700 square miles of our entire continuum of care. It's very large. So when an encampment does come up, it's very, very noticeable and, of course, not pleasing to the community at large. And then we have an intense housing surge that we call them, which is really this resource intensive housing approach to match all of the encampment residents to a housing placement, so that when that housing placement is available, they're able to move out directly into that housing placement. And then we clear the encampment by removing structures and belongings. And then finally it's closed with the help of city and county officials. So you can go to the next slide. So we get asked this question a lot, like what constitutes an encampment? And of course it varies everywhere, but this is how we kind of define it. We have 3 basic types. We have large encampments, small encampments, and what we call hotspots. So large encampments are really 10 or more people in this definable area. There's boundaries, there's a lot of structures for sustained habitation, cardboard boxes, tents, non-permanent structures, there's people there, there's evidence of really a sustained presence, there's trash piles, shopping carts, a lot of belongings, cooking fires. Some people have multiple tents that houses their belongings. And then small encampments are really concentrations of about 3 to 9 people in a location. There's still some structures, not as dense. Non-permanent structures, there's some boxes, some tents, and then there's evidence of people there, but it's really the degree and visibility can vary depending on how many people are there at any given moment. And then the last thing that we call hotspots is really just a small concentration, 1 to 3 people maybe in a location. There's some bedding, maybe sleeping bags. And then they come and go kind of like a week or more, and then they're not there, and then they pop up again. Sometimes people take up residence in the belongings of someone who have left. So really the engagement process that I'm going to talk about in the next few slides can work for all of these things, but for the purposes of what I'm going to be talking about today, it's really the large encampments that we focus on, because those are the ones that have the biggest obviously they're visible, but really people get very irate, and there's a lot of feelings on both sides. There's feelings that they need to be gone, and then there's feelings that these are humans and we need to do something to help them. So next slide. So another thing we get asked a lot about is how do we determine which encampments we're going to close next? So because we got a lot of funding and support from the city and the county, the city of Houston and Harris County, in which Houston sits in here in our area, we started with the visibility, or the ones that are getting a lot of community complaints. But really we wanted to make sure that we were supportive of our city and county partners, but at the same time, we wanted to make sure that we were really looking at the vulnerability of the people that were living in the encampments. And so we came up with a little tool. We visited Seattle before the pandemic and looked at the tool that they used and some of the strategies that they were using to come up with the tool that we're using now. So basically it has these primary characteristics. So the location characteristics, such as the number of people, where they're located, if it's an unincorporated Harris County or if it's in city limits of Houston, how many neighborhood complaints they were getting, how visible they are, and how big it was spreading out, and going into like the sidewalks where people have to walk by, if there's a lot of foot traffic. And then of course the degree of criminal activity that's in the vicinity, if there's a lot of crime going on, followed by the vulnerability of the population, if there's a lot of elderly people with some severe mental or physical health concerns, if there's children, especially minors, although we do not see a lot of that here in Houston, Some physical and behavioral health issues. So there are people there that maybe have been released from hospitals and they're suffering from some either physical or mental health concerns that are not being addressed. Prostitution or human trafficking on site is a big concern because there are a lot of people that are victimized in some of the encampments that we have targeted. Physical violence amongst the members of the camp. The one that we closed where the article was written at the beginning of this presentation, towards the end, there were several pretty significant serious crimes that were reported there at that location. And so it was something that we definitely had to look at, not just for the safety of the people living there, but also for the safety of the staff that are going to be helping those individuals. We also look at the environmental health. So there was a study done by the Houston Health Department at the time on the presence of varmints, so like rats and fleas and hazardous waste. There were even bio waste, so blood and feces, food waste, spoiled food, a lot of loose razors and needles, and standing water. It was an area that used to flood a lot, and so there would be standing water. So those are some of the things we look at as well. Obviously, community safety, such as camping in public parks, open fires. If the encampment is too close to a guardrail, for example, or the highway, or heavy traffic, or near water, and locations, especially in Houston, that have some flash flooding, because we do have a lot of flooding here. If they're near a residential area, if there's some abandoned buildings nearby, and abandoned pets. And then lastly, we look at solid waste. If there's a lot of garbage laying about, trash, bulky items, abandoned chairs and sofas, a place where individuals are dumping things that they don't want or being abandoned. And so each of these site assessment, each of these domains, we give them a score of a rating of 1 to 5 to note the presence of the characteristic and the relative intensity or scale of concern. And then we kind of go from there. Initially, we started off with a list that was priority for our funders, right, for the city and the county. But we're at the point now where we can really use these features that we've identified to kind of just figure out what we're going to be doing and, you know, how we're going to address these locations, because it happens that it's political sometimes. That's the nature of the game that we play, but we want to make sure that it's really about looking at the vulnerability of the individuals residing there. So next slide. So we go through a several week long process of preparing for an encampment closure. So it's not just, oh, we're going to target this one. Once we've identified the one that we want to target with all the various things that I just reviewed, we start with about 4 to 6 weeks out. It's closer to about 4 to 5 weeks where we go out and we've identified the location. This is our initial site reconnaissance. So we're looking at the visual inventory of the site. We refine the initial geographic boundaries because some of them are, you know, they change as people come and go. The number of structures, the likely number of people there. We don't initiate any direct contact with the neighborhood groups, but we look to see if there are any. Here in Houston, we have a lot of neighborhood groups, neighborhood districts, kind of like the HOA of neighborhoods that are kind of overseeing the safety and concern of the residents in that area. But we look to see if there's a pretty active group in their area, because we can, you know, initiate some assistance from those groups. And a lot of times they'll offer like support, such as, you know, closing off streets or storage, or even cleaning up the location. And then talking to maybe business owners and stuff to let us set up outside their businesses and things like that. We also look at traffic congestion, any safety issues, and then we identify the elected officials in that area to garner support if needed. Next slide. And so about 4 weeks out, we complete the site assessment. We finish out the characteristics, the location characteristics, the vulnerability of the population, any environmental health concerns, community safety issues. We confirm the schedule and timing for the proposed response. We brief staff for the neighborhood groups and or the elected officials, and then we brief outreach teams that are engaged in that area of what we're going to be doing. Next slide. And then about 3 weeks out, we have the outreach team start to really initiate their work with the clients. So we create that by name list. We refine the geography of the location. We identify any challenges or barriers that might come up. The number of people that we put on that binding list is important because we try to keep everything that we're doing kind of just related to the individuals there and hush hush. We don't broadcast it to everyone. We just keep the housing providers and our outreach teams in the know. We have our first briefing with the housing partners that are going to be involved, such as the City of Houston, the solid waste people, the rehousing organizations, the police departments, the sheriffs, the transportation, et cetera. But then we don't discuss it outside that because we don't want word to get out that we're housing people from that area, so it doesn't artificially inflate the location. And so it really works. I mean, we create this binding list, and anyone that is not on that list by the time we really are, say on your mark, get set, go, I'm not going to say we don't help, but they're not part of that initial group. We put them on a pending list, if you could call that, just to know that we are aware of them, but they may not be targeted at that time. Next slide. And then really the encampment response 2 weeks prior to the closure, we're looking at making sure all clients have their assessments through coordinated access. We're confirming the services and housing needs. So we're making sure, how many people are going to permanent supportive housing, how many people are going to rapid rehousing, how many people are going to need diversion. And we're making sure that there are housing slots available for them. Our outreach teams are continuing to do that intensive engagement. They're making sure that people have all of their documents. And then at that time is when we really start, our landlord engagement team comes on to really start the response on unit availability and location. So the landlord engagement team that we have, the response strategy that we have, came out of that Housing for Harvey, where we recruited a lot of landlords to house people from the disaster shelters. And so we actually took that strategy and we've been using it for housing placement, and it's worked so well. Since October 1st, we've housed over 4,000 people, and our landlord engagement team has recruited over 3,000 market rate units. We use a landlord engagement fee as an incentive for landlords to be willing to participate with the homelessness response system. And so about 2 weeks out, the landlord engagement team is letting us know how many market rate units are available and then where they are looking at. Next slide. And then about 1 week out, we've confirmed that binding list. We've confirmed the structures to be removed. We know what clients want to take with them and what they want to store. We have a storage option available with the city. We have our second briefing with partners where we confirm the partner roles and what staff are going to be there the week of the surge. Our landlord engagement team lets us know how many units are available, where they're available, so that we can then work with clients to identify where they would like to live. And then at that time, pre-approvals can be initiated by the landlord engagement landlord engagement team. And then also the landlord engagement team starts the process of paying those landlord engagement fees to make sure that those landlords are on board and they're holding those units for us for this purpose. Next slide. And then we get to the big housing surge week. So it takes about a week. We set up early in the morning with tents and a location. It could be outside of a store, or it could be sometimes if it's really hot in Houston, we may need to move indoors. But for the most part, we set up outside with all of the housing partners with pop-up tents and chairs and tables that we bring on site, our outreach teams. And then that's pretty much, on your mark, get set, go. So the encampment response project managers coordinate all that work and communication, and it's really about triaging people. The outreach teams go out and do some navigation support. They continue to do that intensive engagement. They bring individuals from the encampment to the location to meet with housing partners so that they can be enrolled in HMIS. They also take care of any landlord related issues, such as criminal background. If somebody doesn't pass a criminal background, We try to get some of that taken care of beforehand, so there aren't any surprises. But sometimes it happens where someone doesn't get approved at the last minute, and so then we have to identify temporary shelter for them, and that's what outreach continues to do. The landlord engagement team, sometimes they have to get additional units. So when I mentioned those individuals that may not be on the by name list, if there were people that were, they're no longer there that were on the list, and maybe they left, maybe they didn't want housing, we are able to then assist people that came after we set up that by name list. And so at that time, the landlord engagement team may have to secure additional units or make some changes. And so it's all of this is done in real time, where we have staff there at the apartment complex and then also there at the location, kind of communicating back and forth. And then we have transportation. So once a client is approved, they're enrolled in HMIS. They actually get on a bus with their belongings and they're taken to the apartment complex. They move in, their case manager is waiting. We have furniture and a welcome basket delivered. And that's pretty much where it goes. From that point, if there are any belongings left at the encampment or trash, then we have solid waste from either the city. It's mostly the city at this point, but sometimes the county will help, or the neighborhood groups will come along and pick up the trash and then take them out and take it out and start clearing out the encampment. The city has a COVID response team that's kind of cleaning locations all along the city, so they kind of come along as well to clean it up. Next slide. And this is on our social media. We're actively looking for landlords and property managers. We're getting to the point where we've housed over 2,300 single adults in one-bedroom apartments, and we're using up all of the one-bedroom units that are available for our clients. And so we're on an intense support group strategy going on right now to kind of bust some of these barriers that we have with securing one bedrooms, and hopefully we can get some more, but this is one of the things that our landlord engagement team does. Next slide. And then finally, after it's all said and done, really what makes it an official closure is that notice is put up. I mean, the clients have already been identified, that have been notified that this is happening, but then we actually put up notice that this encampment has been closed, has been decommissioned, and that enforcement will start happening. And so then from there, it's really up to the city and the county, HPD, the Houston Police Department, and the Harris County Sheriff's Department to maintain that, to monitor that location and keep it officially closed and enforce if need be. So that's kind of where we are. Our outreach team does use the Show the Way app to to keep track of where our individuals are locating. And I'm sure Matt and his team can talk about the encampment options that are on the app. That's it.
Yes, we can. Before we dive in, was there any questions that came through the chat that would be helpful to answer now?
Nope, I think you're good, but everyone, please do feel free to add questions there if you have them for Anna or for Matt and Kevin as they're going through.
All right, well, I'm going to pass the reins over to Kevin Charlo-Warlot. He is the lead developer here at Syntec, and I will let him explain the work that he has been diligently, passionately taking on over the last few years on Show the Way, but with a focus on encampments today.
All righty, thank you very much, Matt. If you could go to the next slide. All righty, so here's the encampments module for Show the Way. As Anna mentioned, they are using the encampment module. We have other modules for case management and tracking, the clients for an overall by name list. But here we're looking at the encampments functionality. So you can see we have the ability to create different encampments. They can be their own unique camp locations. They can be within, any amount of distance you need, and they're all unique to each other. So it really just depends on your own geographic needs. You can have one encampment that covers, 3 blocks to 200 blocks and create different parcels within that same encampment. We can have different images to help really show what the encampment looks like. We're working on having multiple images so you can see different entry points in the encampments. We do see that some of them are quite large, so one picture is not going to cut it. Also, you may need to be aware of certain hazards, right, of certain areas. These encampments are,
Sorry.
Cool. Yep, you're good. So you have the encampments, they have the locations, you have some information about the encampments, and then you also have the clients that are staying in the encampments. So this kind of ties into creating that list of clients that you need to go and prioritize, kind of like, not kind of, exactly like Anna was saying, you have clients that are actually staying there, so those are the priority pool, versus clients that may not be staying there, maybe they're panhandling, maybe they're visiting, etc. But we need to find a way to localize who are we looking at this particular encampment. Last thing would be the camp status. So we do have whether
you tell me when you're ready. You
okay.
tell me when you're ready to go. All right.
It's okay. The camp status is just whether or not we have this camp as active, and it's something that to be on the radar. That's all. Alrighty. So here is the next slide talking about accessing clients within the encampments. On the GIF to the right, we're seeing. Can you kind of click through and open the bullets? I think it's okay. Alrighty. So here we go on the GIF on the right. We're looking at a client. We're finding John Doe. And then we're now saying that John Doe is staying at this particular encampment. Over here, we're looking at this case management functionality. The Take Action tab is where you're going to do enrollments or any kind of assessment related data, as well as exiting the client. We just popped right back to the client list of the clients that are staying at the encampment. Sorry, the GIF's a little hard to follow. Just a footnote, we will be doing a live demo so we can kind of go through things step by step together. Here, we're just adding a certain specific follow-up, kind of a reminder for us to meet back with John Doe for their second vaccination appointment. Point is, we're adding a client to the encampment and we're populating that camp list. Alrighty, next slide. Alrighty. There we go. Yeah, let's just go ahead and click through the current living situation. So we're working with clients that are on the streets. So this does tie into the HUD data elements, and we want to capture their current living situation. So you'll see we have our information date, which is just whatever day you're meeting with them. Where are they sleeping? So they're going to be placed at a place not meant for human habitation, which is HUD's data response. But that doesn't ultimately tell us too much. So we have some other data elements, such as what is that type of place. Here you can see that we're selecting an outdoor encampment, and then in the middle picture, we're selecting which specific camp it is. So we've selected San Diego camp, and now the test client, Becky Test, is now staying at this encampment. So the whole point of this is showing that there's different ways to attach clients to the encampment, and the point is to work with the client, capture data about where they're living or what's happening with that client story, and this kind of makes a natural flow for them staying in the encampment versus you going out of your way to go ahead and first find this client, attach them to your camp, etc. So more of a natural workflow of just working with a client and having outcomes from that workflow. Alrighty, next slide. Alrighty, so we've talked about encampments as a geographic marker, but we need to look at the data around the client, the different data that we can capture. So here we have one example that Houston's using, which is a document readiness check. And this is some of that pre-work that's being done with the clients that are part of that initial priority pool, and trying to do that pre-work to make sure that they have all of the documents needed so that they can be immediately or as immediate as possible housed, right? So this is one example of a survey that we have implemented to just capture any elements that are specific to Houston's needs in this example. Point being, we can collect really anything that you guys see as priority metrics, as well as just any data in general. And we'll see more about different surveys that we have in place later. Here's the encampment overview. So we're taking a look now at surveys that are attached to the encampment. So this can be, as you've seen, what are the encampment needs as of whatever date you're collecting. So we need food for this many people, et cetera. These are the different COVID necessary restrictions or equipment that we need to provide because this is, at a high risk or whatever the case may be. Alrighty, next. Alrighty, so I'll pass this back to Matt for some of the CDC guidance and what that turns into for our survey. So
the Center for, when COVID first hit, we were all scrambling to figure out what to do, right? Both in our personal lives as well as our work lives, which, for us, focused on helping people that are homeless. So CDC actually published guidance that we could follow on how to support people living in encampments. And a big part of that was allowing people to exist where they are. And, you know, what do we need to allow that to happen? You know, they need distancing, you know, that's ideal. You know, obviously all the things related to hygiene and you know, personal protection, you know, masks, you know, for a while, masks didn't even exist as a concept, but then that's kind of incorporated in. Do we have a place for hand washing? So if hand washing stations can be deployed throughout the continuum of care at the encampments, place to go to the bathroom, food, you know, so the basic human needs, are they being met? Well, because if they're not, then that population at the encampment is going to have to go out into the community to you know, to fill those needs. So the idea being is let's get people what they need where they are, you know, especially if we don't have enough congregate living facilities. Non-congregate living facilities for people to go to, because again, we're trying to spread things out a little bit, not the virus, but spread out to people. So that's the idea. So the encampment surveys, these are actually based on the guidance that came out of from the CDC, and we did have a peer group that reviewed these, including some attendees on the call from the National Alliance, which is thank you for joining us. But yes, you'll notice these all seem pretty familiar to what we did earlier for those of you who were involved. But these can be tailored to meet local needs as well. So and the changes, you know, now you're going to have is you know, we're learning from COVID and what may have been important 18 months ago. Is that not long? However long it was. So now it might change. Again, we didn't do face masks before. Now we've got vaccines. You know, vaccine awareness is more of a compelling need than it was back then. So understanding the vaccination rates of your homeless population, and you know, to look locally at per encampment vaccination rates is important too. You know, if we really want to try to spread the curb the risk of spread. And within here, this is related to encampments in the sense that we do have a feature for requests for assistance, and you know, this is it's related in the sense that if an encampment does need attention or a person in an encampment, we do have public facing and other roles for first responders, could be park rangers, et cetera, that don't have full access to the data behind a person, but they can actually create a ticket saying there's someone here that has a need, and then have that get passed along to trained outreach. They can take that request for assistance ticket and run with it. And so you have more of a continuum of care. Imagine that. So that's the ultimate goal. And
alrighty, I think I can take this one. It's
sure.
a little jam-packed. So this is a set of slides, or a set of screenshots, really showing that request for assistance functionality. So we can start at the top left. This is your home screen. You can see a little tile there saying you have a new ticket. So there's a total of 6 tickets with a little new icon. So you can click on that. That brings you over to the ticket screen, which is on the second screenshot. So here you're seeing a map of the San Diego County area. The blue shaded areas are going to be whatever you're supposed to be covering. So you can see this particular project is covering quite a large area. It could be very small, a number like 2 census tracts, or it could be, you know, any combination. You can see the different ticket markers. So we have a blue one at the very top. We have these red ones with exclamation points. And those are all color coded based on priority, low, medium, high, and urgent. In the third screenshot, we have a list of tickets. So that just shows you the ticket number, the ticket ID, the status of them, and who they're assigned to. The fourth screenshot, we're now looking at an actual ticket. So these are based off of survey submissions for that request for assistance survey. So you can, again, create this for yourself if you're a person experiencing homelessness through the public portal. So you don't need to log in to do that. You do have to work with, your local community does have to have that available and turned on for you to access that. If you are a Show the Way user, you can create this on behalf of a person experiencing homelessness, or you can create this on behalf of a need for an encampment. It's really generalized so that you can create something that needs to be addressed. But we're taking a look at Bill Smith, and Bill Smith is part of that particular ticket. And on the bottom left, we're looking at his profile, we're looking at the ticket, we're looking at the assignment. So right here, you can see that this ticket is assigned to this mobile crisis response project, and the user that the ticket is specifically assigned to is Becky from our team. On the bottom, you will see the ticket details. So this is where you can put really any questions that you need, like what are your needs? You can see that this client needs some food, etc. And then on the right is more of your administrative view to help you make that ticket assignment. So you're seeing the different projects as well as the different project coverages. So we can take a look at that in the live demo later. But point being, you want to get that ticket assigned to whoever's relevant to covering it.
Okay. I'm just going to share, unless there's any questions that need to be responded to now, I'm going to quick pause there. This is a video from a gentleman who's also in Houston that provides shower services and beyond. It's a Greg Festi, but I'll let him do the talking.
My name is Greg Festi. I'm Chief Homeless Officer of the Homeless Depot. We have a outreach social purpose company that provides showers and clean restrooms through our mobile trailer to the unsheltered in Texas. I was the early adopter of the Show the Way software, and I was able to go out in the field and test it and provide input to help facilitate software that can help people like me in the field. I've said it before, I'll say it again, I couldn't do what I do without it. Its user interface is so easy for me and my team. It's intuitive, and it's built by people who understand homeless for people like me who want to help the homeless. One feature that I love is the fact that we can take the picture, and so when we go to the encampments, which we can actually map out and organize our clients by encampment, I can see the picture and know their first name, and when I see them, address them by their first name, which if you ever done outreaches to the homeless, you know that they love to hear the name because very seldom is it called. So I love the software. I would recommend it for anybody who has an outreach company, outreach organization to the unsheltered or the sheltered homeless for that matter. It works, and again, it's enabled us to reach our end goal, which is to earn their heart, earn the trust of the showers, and ultimately get them off the street, back into society. So thank you very much.
All right. Okay. So, don't want more videos. I'll kill that. Sorry about that. Had it all figured out until there. All right, next slide. Okay. So yeah, that's Greg Festi. Other features within Show the Way, just to be aware of, are case management tools to integrate with the region's HMIS. We have a regional command center that receives data to work with and helps coordinate the work of outreach teams. Public-facing community resource directory, which can be used by outreach staff to help guide people who are homeless find and access assistance. And that same resource directory can be made publicly available to people experiencing homelessness themselves as a self-help tool. Considered citizen tools for community members to submit a ticket indicating a person that is experiencing homelessness is in need of assistance. That same request for assistance function that Kevin just provided an overview of, that really can, a big part of that is, the impetus behind it is to help divert people away from more costly and traumatic interventions like jail and emergency rooms. So if we, because think about it, a sheriff or, what's in their typical bag of tricks is, citations and, jail. So if we can do a handoff, we can help avoid that altogether. Family Unification Service that's being provided through a partnership with San Francisco-based Miracle Messages. We've used that for the point in time count as well. So for those of you on the call that use the Counting Us software, that's an optional free feature to include there. And we are seeing success reuniting people who have been home with family members. And we'll be sharing a press release shortly. But as a teaser, we have a gentleman that was homeless for over 30 years that's been reunited with his family successfully, and now has not only just a place to call home, but he has the support to go with that. So he's got his friends and family there that have welcomed him back with open arms, which is awesome. And then the encampment tools, we covered that pretty well today. And then beyond that, I think it's important to know with COVID that we do have the ability to create custom assessments and custom surveys, but we do have one built out specifically for COVID vaccine tracking. Really, the idea behind that is to build our understanding of who has been vaccinated, who has not, and for those that have not, to get some more information about why that is. Is it lack of access? Is it they aren't aware of the science behind it, they're afraid to take it, et cetera. So in that way, if we know what the underlying reasons are, we can help target the interventions appropriately to help increase our vaccination rates. And there is going to be boosters eventually required as well. So just to keep that in mind, it's just, for the people I've talked to in the medical community, it's not going away anytime soon. And, boosters are going to be something that we're going to have to factor in at some point. So with it, I think that's a good spot for questions and answers. So any questions in the chat?
It would be great if you or Kevin could maybe go through the first responder role in a little more detail. We've got some questions about how do we manage complaints or requests for street outreach teams to visit certain areas, and if they can see information that was previously reported about encampments versus maybe some client information.
All right.
Yep. All right. Yeah, I can take the question about the first responder role. So we do have role-based security with different features that we can turn on and off, and we can also restrict different PII. So that's really the background behind it. And we are looking to kind of expand like what that needs to be based off your own experience. But the way we have it right now, first responders are basically able to see existing data without being able to see some of the more restricted information, such as PII. So you can go and search for different clients by first name, last name, date of birth, but you're not able to see all of their other, like their disabilities or any of their demographic data. So the point being, we're trying to reduce duplicates while allowing first responders to interact with existing clients. They're able to submit surveys for that particular client, but they're not able to see any kind of surveys that have been previously submitted. Similarly, with the encampments, they're able to see existing encampments, attach different surveys to the encampment. Let's say they're submitting an observation that this survey has new tents showing up, et cetera. But they're not able to see who's actually staying at that encampment. So they're not able to get any information around the clients, but they're able to interact with the data on a high level.
Okay. There was a couple other questions related to encampments. I have the chat now showing. And one of them is actually related to case management and the ability to directly export into HMIS. So yes, we're going to have let me go over the upcoming webinars too, so you can see what those are. The ability for your community's HMIS to be able to receive data from another HMIS compliant product is, so that's based on the vendor. As a contingency, however, we do have a data warehouse, homelessdata.com, that can receive data from any HMIS. And so that could be the hub that with your current HMIS solution and Show the Way being spokes, feeding data into that hub, deduplicating the information and producing all the regional reports from there, including the LSA, the performance measures, different data analytics, performance dashboards, et cetera. So we have a workaround if your community doesn't, and it's actually not just a workaround, it has a lot of added functionality that most likely doesn't exist in your HMIS. So again, this data quality monitoring tools, NOFA rating and ranking tools to automate the entire process. You know, we can perform data scrubbing as needed. That's an on-request thing because we don't touch your data unless we get permission to do that. Regional geospatial reporting that, you know, now that we have GPS-enabled data sets coming from the Show the Way app, we can do a lot more as far as data analysis goes. Things like racial disparity analysis that you couldn't do without that geospatial data set, because you can't look at a community and say, oh, it's the whole community is 40% white, 30% black, whatever. It's really based on the neighborhood. So to be able to look at localized data, that's really important. And that can go anywhere from looking at school districts to looking at congressional districts, et cetera. So, you know, there's other applications for geospatial data sets. Proximity to public transportation, you know, opportunity, you know, there's a lot that goes into looking at opportunity and upstream causal factors in homelessness that we can start looking and meeting in on. And going beyond the HUD data standards as well, looking at last permanent address, for example, so that way we can look to see if there's any trends in what types of attributes with a community create a higher likelihood of someone, you know, becoming homeless down the road. And with that too, we have researchers that we work with that all with, you know, the proper consent and IRBs, internal, you know, the review boards and all that put into place with your permission to use the de-identified data to learn more from it. And as we grow our data sets through the data warehouse and Show the Way, we can hopefully inform how we're collectively addressing homelessness and best practices. So there's that. And yeah, so the short answer to the question, which I'm not really good at short answers to questions, sorry, is yes, we have an HMIS compliant street outreach app with case management that can produce the HUD CSV, which is the exchange format to allow systems to talk to each other. And other webinars that we'll be talking about here are listed. Those are planned topics. You know, we definitely take feedback. You know, if we hear that everyone wants to talk about one thing and not another, you know, we can shift priorities. Currently, the plan is for us to do this as a recurring theme, just because we feel there's a wave coming, and we want to get ahead of it as much as we can, and use this not just a chance to share our technology, but to hear from you about what's needed and really try to do what we can collaboratively, not just, you know, the 50 or so clients that we support, but also, you know, people that aren't clients, but just in the space to care and, you know, get ideas and try to build the technical infrastructure that's needed, not the ones that we have. The one that's required to us is the minimum, and the one that's needed is something beyond that. And so that's why we're building on this tech, and we're you know, providing these opportunities. So there's that. And then there was a question about
hey Matt,
go ahead.
Just a note about time. We are right at time.
Okay.
If you wanted to do a live demo for anyone who wanted to stay on, we can still do that. But just wanted to let you know we are at time.
So actually, there's a question for Anna. I'd like to give her a chance to do that, about how hard is it to get landlords on board. And before we did the live demo, what I would suggest, instead of jumping to a live demo because of time constraint, is that anyone that's interested in having a community, you know, specific demo of the technology, to feel free to reach out to us. It's simple to do. Send an email to the team, you know, TEAM @simtechsolutions.com. Just mention your interest, and we'll get something set up. But yeah, just out of sake of time, we'll leave the live demo to be more of a personal one. Oh, even better, the contact form. Great, thank you. So Anna, how hard is it for you to get landlords? Oh, I see your response.
I typed into the chat, but we basically offer a $1,600 landlord incentive fee per unit, and so but we do ask that they sign a form that basically states they will accept these funds, and in lieu of a deposit, waive application fees, agree to work with people with criminal backgrounds, evictions, no income, and bad credit. and hold units offline until we can fill them. But these funds are basically, they can keep it for whatever they want, even if we end up not filling the unit. So
Amazing. On a follow on, do you happen to have a risk mitigation fund or anything of that nature if something does go awry?
no, it's something we're talking about actually, about having like a damage fund or something like that. That's something that we're talking about actually in our landlord, in our 1-bedroom barrier busting work group that we're working on right now. It's one of the things. Yeah.
And there was a following question: where do you get the money?
So it was private funding in the beginning when we were envisioning this, but now ESG can be used for it.
Great. So for those of you who have ESG, which is a lot of you, get creative. All right. ESG is Emergency Solutions Grant. Sorry. We do have a lot of acronyms in this space. And okay, and I believe the answer is yes, it can be used for the landlord incentive. Okay, well, we're at, I believe, almost exactly an hour. Again, that same email, team@simtechsolutions.com, can be used to reach out to us for any follow-on questions. You can use the contact form. If there's questions for Anna, we can take those and pass those along. If you do subscribe to the Eventbrite, subscription, basically that's a webinar, basically lets you know if we're having a future one, and, give you notice. But really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. Thank you for all that you do. We're all in this together, and we do still have a lot of work ahead of us, but I appreciate you taking the time to share and hear what's going on in Houston. All right, with that said, take care, everyone.